Well, thank you for that wonderful introduction. I'm excited. I'm happy to be here with you guys. The Spanish part, just so you guys know, I'm originally from Chile, from South America, that really long, skinny country in South America. That's where I'm originally from. I was born there, and my family moved when I was about 7. And I've been back and forth. I actually went back, took a long trip to Chile, met my wife there, and ended up staying 18 years. So, that's another story for another time. And I have the privilege, the honor to travel the world, literally travel the world, and I get to help professionals, business leaders, entrepreneurs on how to become great communicators. And one of the things that I love about my job, and I get to do this as a living, is that I get to help people like you to develop something that is crucial, that is extremely important. It doesn't matter what area you're in. I know most of you here are in the bank sector, bank area, but probably you guys some of you might work in marketing or finance or whatever it may be. Without making a difference of what position you have, there is something that we all need to learn to develop, and that is influence. We were talking a lot in the presentation before you guys, before I came on, was about AI and artificial intelligence. And it's not something I'm an expert on, but when I go into the business world, I can feel that there's some nervousness about AI and things that are coming and changes and how are we going to adapt to this. And I always tell them that even in the era of technology and AI, people skills, our human skills, our ability to influence, to communicate will have more and more importance. So we all need to develop our ability to influence. Now, this is the tricky part. Whenever I talk about influence, and I ask people, hey, what is influence? How do you define influence? How do you describe influence? The answers are usually all over the place. Okay? So I've actually done the homework for you guys, and I've been reading and studying a lot on influence. That's something that I'm passionate about. I've always been attracted to people who have that thing, that influence, which again is hard sometimes to put into words. And a few years back, I was reading a book. I was reading a book on leadership, and it had actually stories of leaders, great leaders that have had great change and impact in business, in politics, in society. And there was one leader that caught my attention. And you guys might, the name, you'll remember the name, Dwight Eisenhower. Yeah, you guys, the name, right? 50s, 60s, he was a general, very successful general in his time, and then also a president here in the United States. And when he was asked about influence, about leadership, he was a good leader, so people were always asking him about what were his secrets to leadership and what was influence for him as a leader. He said, and this is one of the best definitions that I've found, at least simple definitions in regards to what influence is. He said, influence is the art of being able to get others to do what you want. Okay? That's the first part of the definition, by the way. And for many of us, that makes sense. And it's not, actually, this is the easiest part of influence. Because if you have a position in an organization, if you're a boss, you can get people to do what you want them to do. Right? But then, the second part, which is the tricky part, he says, influence is this ability, this art to get people to do what you want, but because they want to do it. So I'm going to repeat this because I think this is crucial for us to understand. Influence is the ability to get people to do what you want, but because they want to do it. And whenever I work with leaders and we're talking about influence and leadership, I ask them, well, how do you get people to do what you want, but because they want to do it? And a lot of times I hear crickets. Crickets. Well, motivation, and they start saying other concepts that are sometimes hard to understand. And this question of how to get people to do what you want because they want to do it, answering this question is crucial because ultimately we all influence, all of us. It doesn't matter, again, what position we're in, we're always influencing. So the question is, how do we do this? How do we influence? And even though I've had my academic background, psychologist with dual master's degrees, I didn't come up with the answer at the university. And even reading books even though I read a lot of books about influence and leadership, I couldn't find the answer to how to do this. How do you get people to do what you want them to do, but because they want to do it? And the answer came a few years ago, I think it was about 5 or 6 years ago. And it came through my son. And just so you know, I have 4 kids, okay? So my oldest is now 18. He's a senior in high school. I have a daughter that's 16, and then I have twins that are 10 years old. And I don't know if any of you here have twins. It's quite an adventure, right, to have twins. My wife, she's pretty small, so she wasn't able to have the twins 9 months. At 7 months, they came out. There's nothing she could do about it. So they were premature, and they had to be in the hospital for a few months. And when they were born, they were so small, so small. It's a boy and a girl, by the way. So the girl, she was born bigger. She was like 4.5 pounds, which is actually good for 7 months. And the boy, his name is Tomas. I have a picture of him, just so you know. He was born weighing around 3 pounds. 3 pounds and something. So he's very, very small. I took this picture just so my hand, almost the size of his body. And when they were born, the doctors told us, okay, look, one of the things you have to be careful and you have to watch out for is that they don't get sick, at least the first few years, because their lungs are just developing. So if they get sick, if they get a normal cold, it could turn into something else, and that could mean, it could be tough. It could be rough for him, especially for Tomas, because he was the smallest one and the weakest one. Okay, Nicole, just so you know, that's the other twin. She always says, as the joke around the house, that she ate all his food. That's why he was so small. So, as they got older, Tomas was about 5 years old here in this picture. One winter, he started getting a cold, just typical cold. Kids get colds, getting runny nose, a little congestion, and as days went by, 2-3 days went by, he started getting very, very congested until one night he was having a hard time breathing. So the next day we took him to his doctor, right away to his doctor. And we said, hey, what's going on? We need help. And she said, I'm glad that you guys brought him now because he's starting to develop pneumonia, infection in his lungs. So it's good that you brought him. And she said, and you're going to have to give him an antibiotic. And it was one of these like strong antibiotics. It's not the cherry flavored one. She said, it's not tasty, but you need to give him the antibiotic. And she showed us how to do it. She said, look, you put it in a spoon and you feed it. You give it to him. Easy. Easy, right? They make it sound so easy. And we went home with my wife. That day, my wife, she had planned a thing with her friends for like a month, and she says, baby, do you want me to stay home? I can, take care of the kids. And I said, no, I'm trying to be the super dad. I'm like, no, don't worry, I'll take care of Tomas. He's no big deal. He's just, got to give him his medication. And she said, okay, but if you need anything, just give me a call. If you need anything, just give me a call. So she left. And about 30 minutes passed, and I go up to his room, Tomas. And even though, you that have kids, kids are sick, but they're still having fun, right? They're still playing around. So he was still on the floor playing with his little toys, all congested. And I walk into the room, and my first strategy, I said, I'm going to talk to him about the benefits. Okay? I'll talk to him about the benefits of taking this medication. So I walk in there, he's playing around, and I'm like, hey, Tomas, I have this medication. It's going to make you feel better. You're going to breathe much better. You're going to feel much better. And I start filling up the spoon, and I'm walking towards him, and I'm about to give him the medication. And right as I'm about to get to his mouth with the spoon, he goes, no quiero. I don't want any. I thought this was going to be easy, right? Talking about the benefits, that's how you persuade people. That's how you influence. And I said, okay, what can I do? What's my second option? My second option, I'm gonna play with them. I don't know if any of you remember your parents playing like the little helicopter game, the airport. So I said, I'm gonna do the little airplane game. So I start filling up the spoon again, and I'm like, hey, here comes the airplane. Open up your mouth. Here comes the airport. And as I'm about to land the plane, he goes, no quiero. I don't want any. Okay. So benefits, the games, what can I do now? And my third option, and I don't recommend this option, okay? Just by the way. I mean, I'm being honest with you, but I don't recommend it. My third option, I said, I'm gonna trick him, okay? I'm gonna trick him. Now he, especially when he was 5, he loved dinosaurs. So I said, I'm gonna walk up to him, distract him a little. I'm gonna say, hey, look at the dinosaur. And I'll just shove the spoon in his mouth. I gotta do this, okay? I need to give him his medication. It's extreme measures here. And I waited for him to calm down, and I walk up to him and I say, hey, look, Tomas, a dinosaur. He looks, and I shove the spoon in his mouth. And it was the worst thing that I could have done, right? He starts spitting everything on the floor. He starts crying. And then he does something that we as fathers, we all know that when your child does this, you've lost the battle. He says, I don't want you, I want mom. I don't like dad, I want mom. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I lost the battle. And in that moment, I had this moment where I could hear a voice in my head saying, call your wife. She knows what to do. And then I had another voice that would say, no. You can't call her. Right? You're the man of the house. You need to take care of this. This is a 5-year-old kid. He's taking control of the situation. And I had this battle in my head until finally I did what any wise man would do. I grabbed the phone and I called my wife. I said, honey, look, I'm here with Tomas. I'm trying to give him his medication. I talked to him about the benefits. I did the airplane thing. I even tried to shove the medication in his mouth. He doesn't want anything. I don't know what to do. And she just listened patiently, quietly. And when I'm done, she asked me a question. She says, Cesar, do we have any yogurt at home? Any yogurt at home? Yeah, we have yogurt, but what does that have to do with Tomas? I mean, he doesn't want to take his medication. And she said, do we have strawberry yogurt at home? Yeah, I'm sure we have strawberry yogurt at home. And then she says, well, I want you to go to the fridge, and I want you to get the yogurt, the strawberry yogurt, and I want you to mix the medicine with the yogurt. The moms know this already. It's so intuitive. Well, I was like, what do you mean, mix the medicine with the yogurt? She said, no, just go to the kitchen, grab the yogurt, put the medicine in the yogurt, mix it around, and now don't give him or don't tell him you're giving him medication. Tell him you're giving him yogurt. And it sounded so simple. So simple. And because I had this traumatic experience just a few minutes before, I was thinking, it can't be that simple. It can't be so simple. It's just mixing the medicine with the yogurt. And I said, are you sure? And she says, yeah, I do it all the time. Don't call me back. So hung up the phone, went to the kitchen, mixed the medicine with the yogurt. I'm going back up to his room. And now I want you to imagine this situation. Now you've just had this experience with this 5-year-old kid. I'm walking up to his room and I'm thinking, okay, what am I going to do now? What am I going to say to him? What's my strategy? And when I finally walked up there, he had calmed down. He was playing with his toys. All I said was, Tomas, I have this yogurt, strawberry yogurt. Do you want some? And he jumped, ran towards me, grabbed the yogurt, and started drinking it all. To the last drop. And I'm standing there thinking, that was it? that was the secret? Mixing the medicine with the yogurt. Mix the medicine with the yogurt. Now, as I've shared this with you, I expect you to be thinking like, okay, all right, thank you. That's a funny story. You know, you're not a very competent parent if you didn't know how to do this. But what does this have to do with us? Right? We're in a leadership conference, mixing the medicine with the yogurt. What does this have to do with us? And I want you to know something. I want you to understand something. This has everything to do with you. Because what happened to me with my son probably has already happened or will happen to you with your teams, with your clients. When you're trying to give them medicine, Now, think about this. Think of medicine as the idea or the message, or think of the medicine as that thing that you're trying to give another person that you know will help them. A lot of times, that thing that you're trying to give the audience or the client or your team is not something that's always going to be welcomed with open arms. Sometimes it requires change, sacrifice. It's not easy. So whenever you have to communicate or try to give your team medicine, probably what happens, what you've felt, is certain resistance. You felt it before, right? You're in a meeting trying to communicate something important, or you're with a client trying to tell them about this important product or service, and you feel resistance. And a lot of times we try to talk about the benefits. It doesn't always work. Or we try to create a really great presentation with a lot of colors and things that come in and out, and we're thinking, that's going to be, people are going to love it. And it doesn't always work. Because the secret is learning to mix the medicine with the yogurt. So the medicine is the idea that you want to get across. You all have ideas that you want to get across. The yogurt are stories. The yogurt are stories. Because just like yogurt, stories make anything more desirable. Stories make ideas, they make messages, they make even sometimes technical, hard data information a lot more desirable if we know how to mix the medicine with the yogurt. Now, what I'm teaching you is not something new, just so you know. Okay, this isn't new. This isn't like, he's got the secret of the universe. No. Stories is something that we've been doing for a very long time. We as human beings, we are storytelling creatures. It's what separates us from any other creature in the world. We tell stories. And what anthropologists and historians say is that we've been telling stories for about 50,000 years. Even before we had a formal language, even before we had alphabets, we had these things that you guys have seen around. Images, pictures, that are our first attempts of stories. And because we've been telling stories for such a long time, what we know today is that we are now hardwired as human beings to pay attention to stories. We are hardwired. Our mind, the way that we understand the world, and not only understand but communicate the world, is through stories. And if you don't believe me, think about how you communicate when you're at home. Think about how you communicate when you're with your friends. Yeah, I can guarantee none of you here pull out your PowerPoint presentation and your bullets when you're just talking with people. You usually tell stories. It's very interesting. You can even do this exercise with kids when they're really little, 4, 5 years old. You haven't taught them anything about storytelling, but when they come home from kindergarten, you can ask them, hey, what did you do today? And what do? They start telling you stories. They're not, Hollywood stories yet, but sometimes they are. Some kids have really good stories. But they'll tell stories naturally. Why? Because we are already hardwired as human beings to pay attention to stories. And that's why we know today, and this is extremely important if you want to get your messages across, we know today that stories are up to 20 times more memorable than just communicating information. Today, you've been through a lot of presentations, and probably if I were to ask you, what did slide number 3 from the 2 presentations ago say, you probably won't remember. But if there was a story, if there was a little anecdote, if there was a joke, you will remember that. This story with the yogurt and the medicine, I've had clients, I've shared this story before, and years have passed, and I run into them again, and they're like, hey, I'm mixing the medicine with the yogurt. I'm still mixing the medicine with the yogurt. And years have passed, and they still remember the story. So the good news, because I do have good news for you guys today, is that in a way you already do this. You already tell stories. All of you tell stories. Whether you believe it or not, you do it. If you listen to yourself when you're with your family, with your friends, even at work with your colleagues, you're telling stories. That's what you do. So the good news is that we all tell stories. The bad news, and this is why I'm here today, by the way, is that even though we all tell stories, and I've traveled the world talking to different people from different cultures, different languages, even though everyone tells stories, hardly nobody tells them strategically. So we all tell stories. And storytelling, just so you know, because you've all heard the concept of storytelling, storytelling is the art of communicating by using stories. That's storytelling. So when someone says, hey, you know story? Yeah, I storytell. Of course, I communicate by using stories. The difference between storytelling and strategic storytelling, which is what I'm going to teach you guys today, strategic storytelling is not just communicating by using stories, it's learning how to influence by using stories. Remember I told you guys at the beginning, influence is the art of getting people to do what you want them to do, but because they want to do it. The main skill, the main tool that we have as human beings to do that is stories. But not any kind of story, strategic stories. So I'm going to teach you guys today how to do this. And when I do this and I teach you guys the format, you're going to kind of have this realization moment of, oh, he also shared a strategic story at the beginning, because obviously I'm doing what I'm going to be teaching you guys as well. Okay? So I want you to take notes on this, because if any of you ask for my presentation afterwards, I could give it to you, but really it's just images and things. So for some people that sometimes ask me for my presentations, I'm always like, look, I can send it to you, but you're not going to understand it unless you were there. Okay? So write down some things, because after I get done with this, we're gonna also have a few minutes of Q&A, and hopefully you guys have some questions so we can do some more application to your reality, to what you guys go through in your day-to-day. Okay? So I'm going to teach you this simple 4-step process, so all of you can learn how to craft and tell strategic stories. Strategic stories, which again is the art of being able to influence or being able to get people to change by using stories. This is extremely useful in leadership, in sales, but also in parenting. Okay? My wife, she doesn't like me to use strategic stories with her. She knows when they're coming, but she always says sometimes with our kids, like, hey, do your storytelling thing with him, please. He needs to learn, or he needs to remember. So we use storytelling in certain moments in our household as well. Okay? So 4 steps, very simple. Why 4 steps? Because if you Google right now storytelling, if you were to write like how to tell good stories, you'd probably get thousands of websites and different ideas on how to tell stories. And there's different models. One of like the most iconic models of storytelling is the hero's journey. You guys have all heard of the hero's journey, and that, even though it's a good one that is still even used today, that was created like in the 20s, and it was more for cinema, and it has 21 steps. So if I were to say, hey, 21 steps so you can tell a good story, 21 steps, probably after 3 I'm gonna start blacking out, right? And today there's different models, like the Pixar model, which has I think like 16 steps. The Pixar has their own model for stories. And there's other concepts that they're creating based on storytelling, like story doing and story imagining, and there'll probably be story AI at some point with AI. I'm going to teach you just a very simple model. I'm going to teach you what I call la cosa más importante, cosa. The word cosa in Spanish, so you're also getting a Spanish class here, means thing. So I'm teaching you the most important thing so you can craft a strategic story, cosa, C-O-S-A. And if you remember cosa, you're also going to remember these steps. I promise you, at the end, you're going to remember these steps. Okay? So the first step to be able to craft a strategic story is to remember that every story will always start with what we call a context. Context. Now, context is also kind of a word that's hard to grasp. In simple terms, the concept is the beginning of a story. Every story will always have a beginning, always. And in the context, you just need to answer 3 questions. So I'm giving you guys the recipe here. Very simple recipe, and you're going to see how I've used the same recipe. There's 3 questions that you need to answer in the context to be able to create a good context. Question number 1 is, when did it happen? When did it occur? Okay, the story that you're telling me or that you're going to start using or telling, when did it happen? Did it happen in 2001? Did it happen in 2010? Did it happen a week ago? Did it happen yesterday? Now, what you're going to notice is that a lot of these things you kind of do intuitively when you tell stories. But now you're going to be able to do it with a lot more precision because you're understanding what you're doing now when you're telling a story. So the first question is, when? The second question is where? Where did this story that you're telling, where did it happen? Did it happen at work? Did it happen at home? Did it happen at the doctor's office? Where did it happen? Now, why are these two questions so important? It's because when and where help your audience to start imagining the scene. And ultimately, what you want when people listen to your story, whatever that story might be, you want them to start going into the story with you. You want them to start imagining the story, not just listening to information. That's not memorable. But when people start living the story with you, that's when people start feeling things and they can remember your story. So the way we do this in simple terms is by answering the question of when and where. Now, when you guys tell stories, a lot of you already kind of do this. If I ask you like, hey, what did you do yesterday? Or what did you do the other day? You're like, oh, you know what? Last Tuesday, I was in my office. You see how you're answering the two questions? So a lot of times we're already doing this. And one of the things that I always suggest to my clients is I say, hey, when you're going to tell a story, first don't tell people you're going to tell a story. Okay? Don't tell them, hey, I'm going to tell you a story. Because you know what happens, at least in the business world, when you do that? People get kind of uptight. Like, oh, story? We can't tell stories, right? Oh, this is not a place for stories, please. That's for school, that's for home, that's for when we're joking around. And the funny thing is that we're all always telling stories. In our minds, we're always creating stories. But for some reason, a lot of times in the professional business world, we think of stories as like, no, it's something that's for another context. Here, we're all about business. We're all about, concrete information. So I always tell my clients, if you want to tell people that you're going to tell them a story without telling them, just say, I'm going to share an experience. Or, let me give you an example. Oh, we like that, right? In the business world, when we say, I want to share with you guys an example. Oh, everyone pays attention. Example means something concrete, right? Or if I were to say, I'm going to share with you an experience, no one gets uptight about that. Because if someone were to be like, no, Cesar, we don't want to hear your experience, who looks bad in that situation? The other person, right? So experience is also something that we've all kind of socially accepted, is if someone wants to share their experience, we have to be open to people's experience. So if you're going to start your story, you'll be like, hey, you know what? I want to share this experience with you of something that happened last week with my team while I was in the office. And by doing that, right away, you're going into a story. Now, there's a third question, because I said there was three questions that we have to answer. There's a third one, which is the most important question in the context. Okay? This is everything that we're doing now is just setting up the scene for this third question, which is who. And by who, I mean who is the main character of the story. Because that is a golden rule of stories. There's always a main character, always. There always has to be a main character. If there's no main character, there is no story. I'm going to repeat this again, okay? Because a lot of times we think we're telling stories, but we don't even have characters in our story. We're just doing I call it just like an overview of something. A story, ultimately, is an emotional experience that happens to someone. That is the simplest definition of a story. It's an emotional experience that happens to a person. So there needs to be a main character. And you know why? We as human beings, we connect with the story through the main character of the story. That's why you've probably been in stories or heard stories before where you haven't connected. And it's probably because the person who was telling the story didn't do a good job at setting up the main character or introducing the main character, or there is a main character and you just didn't connect with the main character or with any of the characters in the story. So did you notice I showed you a picture of my son? Who doesn't connect with a baby, right? A premature baby. And then I found another pretty picture of my son, with the spiky hair and everything. So I do that on purpose because as soon as you see that, you connect with it. If any of you have kids, you'll connect with it. If you don't have kids, you'll still be like, oh, that's a cute baby. And if you have kids, right away you're like, oh, you're remembering your own story through my story. Because ultimately, the objective, okay, every stage in storytelling has a goal. The objective in the context is to create connection. This is the main purpose of why we have a context in a story. We're trying, in those first few seconds, if we're telling a short story, first few seconds, we're trying to create connection. We're trying to get the audience to, in a way, start hearing their own story through yours. And obviously, when you're in this type of context, it's hard to know if they're connecting. The way that you see that people are connecting is because they're just engaged. They're laughing, they're smiling, they're looking forward. That's how you tell that people are connecting with the story. And that is the goal of the context of the story. So if there's one thing that I want you to remember, because I'm going to show you a few steps, but every step always has a goal. So if you understand the goal of every step, then when you're crafting your own stories, and especially when you're telling your stories, you can focus on that. You can focus on, okay, in the context, I have these 3 questions that I got to answer. When did it happen? Where did it happen? Who did it happen to? But the most important thing is I got to be able to create connection. I got to be able to introduce the main character in a way that gets people to connect, that feel like, oh, that also happened to me, or that's happened to someone I know. Because if people connect with the story, now they're much more willing to listen to the rest of the story. Does that make sense? Once you achieve that, now we go to the second stage. And this is the main plate of any story. The second step is the obstacle. And the obstacle, when I talk about obstacle, the obstacle is the challenge. There's got to be some kind of a challenge. There's got to be some difficulty in your story. Imagine you going to watch a movie, for example. And the movie starts and it's all great and everyone's happy, and then the movie continues and everything's still great and everyone's happy, and then the movie finishes and everything's great and everything's happy. You'd probably say, I'm not going back to that movie. What we like, what we crave, what we pay attention to neurologically is conflict. Our brain is hardwired to pay attention to conflict because it wants to learn to avoid things in the future. So whenever we're telling a story, if there is no conflict, people usually kind of zone out. Now, when I say conflict, please, okay, I want you guys to understand what I'm saying here. I'm not talking about a Hollywood conflict. If you do have a Hollywood type of conflict in your story, like life or death situation, you survived a plane crash, or you lived in the wilderness for a week and had to fight off a wild bear. If you have some kind of story like that, I usually tell my clients, if you have something like that, come talk to me after, we'll create a keynote for you. Okay, and you can travel the world telling those stories, because there are people that do that. There are people that have had sensational, incredible experiences, and then they just now travel the world getting paid a lot of money to just share that story. It happens. But for most of us, 99% of us, we don't have, we have interesting stories, but most of us is not like that life or death situation. We have just simple, sincere stories. Who here hasn't had a hard time trying to give their child medication or their vegetables? Or something that we knew that was good for them and they didn't want it. Probably most of us have had that experience. It's a simple experience. But still, even though it's simple, you can still make it memorable. You can still make it emotional. Because one of the things that we love and we crave also is failure. We love when we're listening to a story. If any of us have stories of failure, we all should have stories of failure. Those are the type of obstacles that we really, really enjoy. Because we've all gone through that at some point. I failed as a dad. I couldn't give my son his medication. But we've all had experiences like that. Now, the goal here in this stage of the story is to create emotion. Okay? Emotion. This is what makes your story memorable, is for people to feel emotion. So if they're laughing with you, if they're feeling sad, if they're feeling a little bit anxious, any emotion that you can get people to feel, you're achieving the objective or the goal in this stage. And there is a secret to do this, just so you know. Because you're like, oh, do I have to speak loud? Do I have to speak soft? Do I have to move around a lot? Yeah, that stuff helps. But really, the secret ingredient to get people to feel emotion is vulnerability. And when I say vulnerability, I mean you as the storyteller or as the speaker, you have to show a little bit of vulnerability. Because when you feel emotion, usually your audience will also feel something. Unless they're psychotic or something, okay? But most people will feel something if you're feeling something. Now, Vulnerability is a word that we've kind of thrown around, and it's even used as a negative thing. A lot of people, like in Spanish, just so you know, vulnerabilidad, which is vulnerability, is used as like a weakness or poverty. So they use vulnerabilidad to talk about like a poor place. So a lot of times when I'm talking to leaders about vulnerability, there's like a certain knee-jerk reaction, a negative reaction to it. But the real definition of vulnerability, just so you know, it comes from psychology, the word vulnerability. And the real definition, the simplest definition of vulnerability is the willingness to show emotion. That is vulnerability. Your willingness to show emotions. Whenever you are willing to show an emotion, it doesn't mean you have to start crying, but just to show an emotion. Show that you were a little frustrated, to show that you were a little embarrassed, to show that you were a little sad or a little angry. Just emotion, you're being vulnerable. And by doing that, you're also, in a way, triggering your audience to feel something as well. And that is the goal in this stage of the story. That's why in the obstacle, you have so many opportunities, because it's an obstacle, it's a challenge, it's a difficulty. So you can play around a lot more with the emotions so people can feel emotions. And the more emotions people feel, the more they will remember the story. So once you accomplish this, now again, we're going step by step. So the first step in the context, what is the goal? What do we want to accomplish in the context? Connection, right? We want people to feel connection through the character, hopefully through the main character of the story. In the second stage, what is the objective? Emotions. We want people to feel emotions. So that means you, as the communicator, as the speaker, you need to also feel something. I want you to know something, okay? I train people in communication, and I always tell my clients, I say, look, communication is art. We all agree that it's an art form. Communication is an art form. What does art mean? It means that it creates emotions. So if you're communicating and you're not even thinking about, are people going to feel something? You're not really communicating. You're just giving information. Communication, real communication, and that's why whenever you think of the best communicators that you've been around or that you've had a chance to listen to, you're always going to say, oh, I felt something. I felt something. Oh, they were so fun. They were so engaging. Oh, I felt something. Because true communication is about getting people to feel something. And stories, in their essence, get people to feel something. Because if you're in the conflict, if you're in the obstacle, you can get people to feel something if you show a little bit. I'm not saying go overboard, but a little bit of vulnerability. Is this where the story ends, Cesar? Sometimes my clients say, is this where it ends? Because if this is where it ends, I mean, I'm not going to be like, what do you want me to do? Tell my team that I went home crying after the meeting and I didn't want to go to work the next day? And then that's the end of the story. No, right? Because then now you're leaving people in a low energy, and plus you're not looking very good either. That's why the next step, and this is the one we all like and enjoy, the next step, the third step, is the solution. The solution. And the solution is what we also know as, the happy ending. All stories usually have a happy ending. We've kind of been trained for that ever since we were kids. Any story they told us, there was usually a happy ending. Any movie we watch, I love watching James Bond movies, for example. Have you all noticed that there's always a moment in the movie where you really think he's not going to get out of it? They throw him in a pool full of sharks. He's got a broken arm. He's about to pass out. And you're like, he's going to break the pattern. And then all of a sudden, something happens. And he gets out. Because the hero always needs to get out. There always needs to be a happy ending. Now, the typical happy ending, usually we'll answer the question of, well, how did he or she solve the problem? Right? That's the question that we'll usually answer in the solution. How did he or she, referring to the main character, solve the problem? And we have a lot of stories where we can show that. But when it's real personal stories, not all real personal stories have the typical solution. Do you agree on that? Sometimes we have stories where we failed, where we didn't get the promotion, or we got fired, or where we had to, break up, or something happened with our kids. So we don't have the typical solution, and you could be asking yourself, well, so does that mean that's not a good story because it doesn't have a solution? Well, when it doesn't have the typical solution, we can create it and transform it into a solution by answering the question of, well, what did he or she or I, if I'm telling my personal story, what did I learn from that experience? What did I learn from that experience? So to create a solution or to transform a story into a happy ending, we can either answer the question of how did he or she solve it, which we do have a lot of stories where there's a solution, or simply how or what did I learn from that experience? Because when you're able to share what you learned, now the feeling of the story is still positive. Does that make sense? Even when there's failure, even when there's disappointment, when you look back on it and you say, you know what, because of that experience, I became a better person. Or after that failure, after that situation that I had at work, I decided that I'd never let that happen again. So I started working 3 times harder. Or I started listening more to my team. Or I started being more empathetic. And you see how all of a sudden now the story has a happy ending. Because ultimately what you want to do here in the solution is show the change or the transformation of the main character of the story. I'm going to share with you guys a little secret, okay? I sometimes don't share the secret because I don't want to burst the bubble. but I'm going to do it today. Every story that you've ever heard, that you've ever watched, that you'll ever tell, ultimately what every story is trying to do is just show you the change or transformation of a character. That is the essence of every story. The change or transformation of a character. So it doesn't matter what's going on. It doesn't matter the conflict. It doesn't matter the obstacle. We know intuitively there's something that says, okay, but at the end, they're going to be better for having gone through this. At the end, they're going to be here when at the beginning they were here. That's the change or transformation, and that is the objective or the purpose of the solution. So, I've taught you 3 steps. I said there's 4. Okay, the 4th one is what's going to make this whole process strategic. But for now, with 3, you have the structure to be able to tell a good story. Okay, so for example, the first step, what is the first step? The context. And what is the objective in the context? Create connection. Very good. The second step? The obstacle. And what is the objective in the obstacle? You want people to feel emotion. And the third step? The solution. And what is the objective in the solution? To show the change, right, of the character. But there's one last step. There's the 4th step. And this is what makes this whole process strategic. The last step is what I call the application. The application. And in the application, and this is what makes your story strategic, by the way. In the application is where you share the idea or the message that you're trying to get across. Because yes, even though we've been talking about storytelling and I'm showing you a structure, simple structure to create strategic stories, stories are just a vehicle. Okay, stories are just a vehicle. They're a means to an end. The end, where we want to take people, is to an idea, to a message. But the story needs to be good so we can connect that idea or message in a way that makes it memorable, in a way that people remember it. Because some of you could be saying, hey, Cesar, but okay, you've been teaching us storytelling, we have all these steps, but can I just get up here and just share the message? I mean, I'll save 20 minutes if I do that. And I'll say, yeah, you'd save 20 minutes. But what if people leave and they don't remember anything you said? Or what if people leave and in 5 minutes they don't remember your message anymore? You didn't create any impact. So the purpose of a story and why we do this, why we have this whole strategy, right, where you could be like, oh man, I'm going to have to take 20 minutes to create this story, and then I'm going to take 2 minutes to tell it, and I could have done that in a minute if I would have just said the message. Well, the purpose or the reason why we're doing this is because ultimately we want people to remember the message. Because I can guarantee something. If people don't remember what you said, they will not do anything with your information. A lot of times I work with clients who say, especially the leaders, oh, I've told my team 10 times the same thing, and they never do it. They're so hard-headed, they say. And I tell them, well, maybe you're just not communicating it in a way that makes it memorable. Because I don't think people wake up in the morning, I don't think your team gets up in the morning and they think, today, I'm not gonna pay attention to what my boss says, right? Today, I'm gonna make it hard. I don't think people get up like that. I think people want to collaborate, people want to incorporate new information, but it's our job when we're communicating to do it in a way that people remember it. The objective, what we need to answer here when we're creating the solution, we always need to remember as we're telling a story, people are going to be asking themselves, well, why should I care? He's telling me a story about his son and medication, but why should I care? What does this have to do with me? Or how does this apply to me? So in the application, this is where we're going to connect to the story the idea or the message that we're trying to get across. Because the goal, ultimately, is to influence our audience to want to take action. That's what ideas are all about. They're not just to share. They're to hopefully get people to take action. But if people don't remember your ideas, they probably won't take any. So at least by using stories and knowing how to put them in the yogurt, knowing how to mix the medicine with the yogurt, you've improved your possibility by 20 of getting people to remember it. And this is what I call la cosa más importante. I'm teaching you guys Spanish too. The most important thing, because when you remember the word cosa, you will also remember these 4 steps. What is the first step? The context. And what is the objective in the context? Create connection. Very good. What is the second step? The obstacle. And what is the objective in the obstacle? Create emotion. The third step? The solution. Very good. See, you guys. And what is the objective in the solution? Change. Show change. And finally, the A? And what is the objective in the application? You want to motivate or inspire your audience to ultimately take action. And that, my friends, is la cosa más importante. Or that is the most important thing so you can craft and you can tell a strategic story. What questions do you have? Because I have a few minutes to be able to answer a few questions. How many minutes do I have? Just so I'm good? We started a few minutes earlier, so. Okay, because I'm not looking at my clock. Okay, what questions do you have to be able to help you? Whether it be with cosa or just applications of storytelling in your own job or your own life. Yes?
This is probably a very tactical one, but when you talk about saying when, is it important to say like in the year, like you said, like in 2010, or is it enough to say like when I was in this job or when I lived here?
Yeah.
Is there a difference between the two?
Mainly is, I would say that if the date is extremely important for the story, then I would get very specific. Okay. One thing that happens when you get too specific is you also start distracting.
Right.
Okay, so if I were to tell a story and say, oh, it was March 24th of 1994, and I was this age, and plus that day was the day when the rocket went up to space, and I start getting very specific. What starts happening with people is they start going on tangent. You as a speaker, but also people as they start connecting with the story, they'll start thinking about different things. So I would give them just enough information for them to help them start imagining. But if the date, like the specific date, is not relevant to the story you're telling, then you don't have to get that specific. I'll give you an example. If I said September 11th of 2002, 2001? 2001, yeah, I was finishing high school back then. So if I were to say September 11, 2001, that is relevant, right? That is a relevant date. And obviously, the moment I say that, everyone goes back to where they were at that specific date. And if I were to say specific time, they all go back to that. Now, if that is not relevant, then I would just say, when I was 7 years old or when I was 15 years old, so I don't distract. Good?
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes.
A lot of the time when I'm talking to my clients, we use what we call feel, felt, found. If they have an objection, I understand why you feel that way. Others have felt this way. This is what we found. In the context of giving them, like, other clients have felt this way, do you feel like that's too broad? Should we narrow down to who we're talking about?
Yeah, if you use, and this is the interesting thing, when you use a name, people connect a lot more with it, even if they don't know the name. Like, you could just make up the name. I could say, I had a client whose name was Victoria, and just by saying that, people start looking in their own mental maps for people that they know with that name. So it starts putting more personality to the name, and the personality is important because that's, again, how they're going to connect to the story through the character. So I always tell my clients, if you can, use a name. And they're like, hey, what if I'm going to use somebody's name and that person maybe doesn't know I'm going to be telling their story? I said, well, use another name, okay? You just use another name and we'll substitute it, and still you'll help people to start imagining and connecting a lot more with the main character. That music. What other questions do you have? These are good questions. These are very specific questions. Yeah.
Do you have any recommendations or good examples of brands doing this on a mass scale digitally via email, blog, website content?
Yeah. So I mean, there are a few brands that are known for their storytelling. Like Nike, for example, is known for their storytelling. Nike, they one of the things that set them apart when they started using a lot of storytelling, brands before Nike, especially the sports brands, weren't using a lot of the athletes and telling the story of athletes or even people. If you notice, there's commercials with Nike where at the end it'll just say Nike Air Zoom. But the whole commercial is just someone getting up in the morning, putting on the shoes, going out and running, and then at the end it says Nike Air Zoom. They're not even talking about the characteristics of the shoe. They're just telling you a story, a visual story in this case, of, you can go out, their message, Just Do It, is all about, you can go and conquer whatever you want to do. Go and do whatever you want to do. So since that's always their universal message, all the visual storytelling that they show, is always related to that. So I think Nike is a good example. Apple, I think they've kind of gone away a little bit. Maybe it's Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs, just so you know, he would always say that storytelling was the most powerful skill. And the most powerful person, he would say, is the storyteller. So he was a master storyteller, known as that. And I think when he was alive, he put a lot more storytelling into how they were communicating their messages. But usually, the interesting thing you'll find is that in any market, if you go look at what the top brand is, the brand that really sets himself apart, you'll probably find it's a brand that tells stories. Because in the marketplace, there's a saying that the one who tells the best stories usually wins. And you see it over and over again with the top brands. They're usually telling the top stories. And when you go look at their marketing, it's never talking about the benefits or even talking about the characteristics. They're usually just telling you stories, because what we know today is that people don't just buy because of the characteristics or even the benefits. People buy because of stories, because they connect emotionally to the stories. And that's the same power that you have as a communicator, as a leader, when you're up in front of people. I highly suggest, remember this, even though we all have a message that we want to get across or an idea that we want to communicate, always remember that people first want to connect with the messenger before connecting with the message. And a lot of times we do it backwards, right? We get up and we're all about the message, and then we ask ourselves, oh, well, people didn't really connect with the message. It's because they didn't connect with the messenger. And the way that we connect with the messenger is through the stories of the messenger. And then once you connect with the messenger, you're much more willing to accept whatever message they want to communicate. Any other questions? Yes.
You mentioned Dwight Eisenhower. Who are some of your other favorite storytellers that you've learned from throughout your career?
Steve Jobs was one. He was more very corporate storytelling. I also like to include some more personal storytelling into the way that I teach it. And there's a reason for that. When I was coming in today, I remembered that when my family moved to the States, I was 7 years old, and we arrived to a school, an elementary school, where they were piloting a storytelling program for kids. So I got lucky in a way, because I went to the school and they said, do you want to go to English class or do you want to go to storytelling class? Because both will help you to learn English. And I said, historias, I want to go to the storytelling. And I started learning storytelling as a child. Obviously, as I started learning the language, my stories got better. And when I was 11, around 11 or 12, I competed in like a scholastic level storytelling competition, and I won. So what happened is they invited me to this Timpanogos Storytelling Festival. That's why I was telling you I was remembering, because this is where they do the Timpanogos Storytelling Festival here once a year in Thanksgiving Point. And for 2 years in a row, I was a youth storyteller at the storytelling festival. So the great thing about that is I learned it as a child, and I learned like from real these storytellers that get up and teach kids stories, and they tell wonderful stories about dragons and things like that. And as I got older, I never thought it was like a unique skill. I thought everyone could do it. Because when you learn something as a child, you think everyone can tell stories. And then once I got into the business world and I was working in the corporate world at first, I noticed that it was something that everyone wanted to learn. Like even my managers at that time were like, hey, can you teach me how to tell stories? And I said, well, you can already tell stories. Not like that. How do you connect personal stories with organizational principles? And I started creating like a little methodology, and then I went on my own and just started teaching for a living this skill. So I learn a lot from like real authentic storytellers, but when it comes to like business, it's, Steve Jobs was a good one. Today, I think most people are trying to use stories to communicate, but one thing that I always remember is that stories are personal, emotional experiences that happen to people. So even a lot of times in the business world, I don't see a lot of that. And when I do see someone who can tell like real, vivid, emotional experiences that happen to them or happen to someone, they usually stand out a lot more because they're actually telling a story, so our brain is much more in tune to that. So, but I'm always just picking up little things from everyone. Really, it's like if you ask me who's my favorite, I don't know. I just always, when I hear a good story, I'm like, that's a good one. That's a good story. Any other questions before we close up? So I want to share an experience with you guys to finish this up. And I already talked about Tomas, who was one of the twins. So just so you guys know, when I was creating my trainings and keynotes, I would always practice my story with Tomas, and Nicole would sometimes come into my office and say, where's my story? You're telling stories about Tomas, where's my story? So I had to incorporate a story about Nicole and see how I could share a story of Nicole and also teach you guys a valuable principle to close this up. So during the pandemic in Chile, I lived in Chile at that time, we were in lockdown, straight lockdown, for 2 years. You guys were lucky here, okay? 2 years of lockdown, masks and everything. And one of these days, we could just kind of go outside and be in our front yard, and my daughter, she comes up to me, Nicole, and let me see if I have the picture here. Yeah, Nicole is the one with the mask, by the way, okay? See, I had to put a picture with Tomas as well. He wanted to be in the story. So Nicole comes up to me and she says, Dad, I want to learn how to ride a bike, but I want to take off the training wheels. She was about 5 or 6 years old at this time too. And at first, as a dad, you're like, oh, little princess, are you sure you want to take out the wheels? And she said, yeah, I want to take out the wheels. And I said, okay. So we take out the wheels, we go outside of the front yard, and she gets on her bike. And I start giving her instructions. I'm really nervous. I don't want my little princess to fall and hurt herself. So I start saying, look, baby, I'm going to be holding on to your seat the whole time. Okay, you just pedal. And I'll hold on to you. I will not let go. I promise I will not let go. And she just looked at me and said, okay. And she gets on her bike and she starts pedaling. And as she starts pedaling and she starts picking up speed, if you remember when you're training your kids, The moment they start picking up speed, the first few times they get nervous. And the whole bike starts wiggling. And the moment the bike starts wiggling, she puts her foot down. And she can't keep going. So I say to her, you have to keep pedaling, right? You can't put your foot down. So she gets back on the bike, she starts pedaling again. She starts picking up speed, the bike starts wiggling all over the place, and she puts her foot down. And we did this for about 10 minutes straight. Until it got to a point where I stopped and I said, Nicole, listen, if you want to learn how to ride your bike like a big girl, you can't put your foot down. You have to keep pedaling. Even when you get scared, you have to keep pedaling. So next time, when you get a little scared and the bike starts wiggling, you got to start pedaling faster. Daddy's going to hold on to you. And she just looked at me and said, okay, Papa. She gets on her bike and she starts pedaling. And she starts pedaling. And all of a sudden the bike starts wiggling. And this time, instead of putting her foot down, she just keeps pedaling. And she started pedaling so fast that I couldn't hold on to her anymore. And I had to let go, and I'm running next to her trying to keep up. And she was able to ride for about 5 seconds until she noticed that Dad wasn't there, and she put her foot down. You can have a picture here of one of her first few times that she was able to go on her own. And when this happened, I was so excited. I said, yeah, baby, you did it. And I'm coming up to her. I'm going to give her a little kiss. And right as I'm coming next to her face, I see a little tear coming down her eye. And my first thought was something happened. Maybe she hit her leg. And I said, baby, are you okay? And she looked at me and she said, Daddy, I'm so happy because I was able to ride my bike like a big girl. Ride her bike like a big girl. And the reason why I share this with you is because you're also going to have to get on a bike and pedal. Telling stories, and especially taking this in the corporate world, taking this to the business world, is not easy. I know it's not easy. People, when they train with me, they're always like, yeah, I want to tell stories. And then when they leave, they're like, yeah, I'm going to tell stories. Because it's not easy. There's vulnerability. There's, am I going to use a personal story? And what if people don't like it? What if it doesn't work? What if I just can't say it correctly, or I forget something? And we start having these fears. And when you have those fears, I want you to remember that you just have to keep pedaling. Storytelling is a very unique skill set, which even though you can learn the steps, like I've taught you today, you really just become a better storyteller by telling stories. So next time, you're going to go into that meeting, you're going to do that presentation, you're going to have that conversation, and you're thinking, okay, I'm going to use cosa. I got the cosa. I'm going to do it. And then once you get on the bike and you're walking to the meeting, you're saying, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it this time. I can guarantee there's going to be a little bit of wiggling around. It's going to happen. And when it does happen, I want you to remember that you have to keep pedaling. Just keep pedaling. And maybe one of those times, you'll go in there, tell a story, and you'll come out thinking, hey, I did it. I did it like a big storyteller. You did it because you were able to tell a story. Thank you very much.